This is our last lesson on management leading. So just to very quickly go over the last day, the main thing we looked at was that a leader is somebody who communicates, motivates, sets an example, obviously leading by example, and delegates tasks to staff. So we're actually mainly focusing on the delegating aspect today. That's what you're expected to do if you're a leader. And if you don't have those qualities or characteristics, in some areas, if there's some things that you're falling down on, then generally your leadership abilities kind of are a little bit diminished. There are the three different types of leadership styles. Even if you were thinking about a sports team or a local business or a school teacher or anything where somebody has, I suppose, an authoritarian role of sorts, um, you can see that obviously not everybody fits under a category. Generally, you can kind of fall in between two, but they're quite distinctive in what they mean. So autocratic, is your general. It's your commander of the army. It's the real serious. Everything comes from the top, and it's very controlling. We have our list of information about what's involved in that, and again, that was the last lesson, so I don't want to go through it. And there's the advantages and disadvantages of being a control freak. Democratic leadership generally is obviously getting everybody to participate in deciding what can happen, but the onus really does fall back on the manager at the end. We have our details on what is made up in a democratic leadership, and then we have all the advantages and disadvantages. And even from a government standpoint, the vast majority of nations in the world would be democratic, in that everybody gets a chance to vote and to influence, but ultimately it's the government that make the decisions. The government can't just say let everybody decide what they want to do, because there'd be anarchy. So, democratic pretty much is what you would see in most government scenarios, but businesses run like that too. Laissez faire is a very trusting style of leadership. Basically, you believe your employees have the best interest of the company at heart, and you trust them, and they make decisions, and they have a lot more authority. So it's quite relaxed in that you believe that you're only one man or one woman, and there's only so much you can do. So why not let your employees contribute as much as possible? The problem might be, maybe because your employees are paid the same rate, maybe some of them are doing nothing, and other ones are really working hard, and then there's a lack of motivation. If you're working really hard and you're getting the same pay as somebody else, you mightn't be too happy. So there's kind of a lack of supervision there, I suppose, and a lot of trusting in your employees, but it has its benefits. What we're looking at mainly from now is, just as was to finish this chapter, is delegation. So delegation would be to pass down control to somebody else. You can see here that there is a hierarchy. You have the individual at the top, and then you have their subordinates. Maybe there are 5 assistant managers, and then you have the people at the bottom, I suppose, of the hierarchy chain. And to delegate would be to pass the control down. So if I needed a file to be completed for Friday and I'm the manager, I could pass it to an assistant manager. And if they were really busy, they could pass it to just, I suppose, a general employee. So it involves assigning tasks to another person. A manager delegates to a subordinate. And it's generally by passing something down to somebody maybe who's below you in the kind of chain of control. What happens when you delegate? Well, you have to have open communication, because you are taking some of your responsibilities and you're giving them to somebody else. Your employees have to obviously have some bit of skills and experience in order to deal with that. And I suppose from a managerial control standpoint, you would need to go back then and maybe supervise on what's being done. This is kind of just basically more details as to what I've said there. Standards in terms of communicating, the employee obviously needs to know what's going on, and they need to know how to, I suppose they need to know how to fulfill the task. What I might actually, just because I think it's kind of sometimes better to have a concept when we're talking about something like this. So if you take a professional sports team, and I know maybe not everybody's interested in soccer, but a lot of you would have an awareness, is even if you don't follow it, you'd be aware of what would go on. So you have a manager who's paid millions every year, and they're running a club that's worth potentially billions. There is a lot of different things going on. And if a manager is a control freak, and if they're completely autocratic and they want to make every decision themselves, they want to take all the trainings, they want to check over all of the players' food and nutrition, they want to check in with the physio every single day and make sure that everyone's being treated right, and they want to influence what the physio should do, they want to influence what the nutritionist should do, they want to influence the strength and conditioning program, they want to do all the hands-on coaching, and they're not delegating any task to anybody. They're setting themselves up for failure because they're trying to do everything at once. So what should a manager like that do? And in professional sports teams or any big business, you will see that a lot of them delegate. A lot of them can take a step back role. They don't do all of the strength and conditioning with their players. They don't do any physio drills. They're not involved in deciding on the nutrition for the team. They're not involved in a lot of different areas of the business. If you have a company and you have employees coming in and English isn't their first language, or they might be struggling for communication in some element, maybe you might have a translator brought in. You're not trying to do everything yourself. You're bringing in other people to the company to help you along. And if you're going to bring in other people to do some form of coaching for you or some form of managerial work for you, you need to be open communication. The people you bring in obviously need to be skilled in what they're doing, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the responsibility comes down with management. And if everything falls apart, it's the manager who loses their job. I often think it's sometimes easier to think of this if you base all of this on a concept. So, professional manager of a sports team or a company, what does it mean if they're to delegate? And if they don't delegate, generally it's a complete disaster, especially if it's a big company. So again, let's just think of that professional sports team, and you have your manager at the top and they're delegating. Well, they're reducing their own workload, and it allows them to focus on things that they may actually need to spend more time on. So they may need to spend more time discussing an issue that has come up over the last couple of weeks and fixing that issue, rather than trying to be here, there, and everywhere and dealing with every single part of the business or company or team or whatever it is. Generally, it can increase employee motivation because the people who are working under you aren't just sled dogs that are just dragged around the place doing work for you. They actually have a mind of their own and they can do things themselves, and they're given responsibility. So if you have employees and you give them no responsibility, it's a huge lack of motivation if you're basically just telling them what to do all the time. But delegating staff to them allows them, you're trusting them, and you build up their motivation and usually the productivity too. Management training, though, obviously you're giving them the opportunity to develop skills in whatever they're now practicing and their focus is on, but the training would probably need to be there in the first place before that begins anyway. So they're all advantages of delegating, and to be honest, I would say delegating would have much more advantages than disadvantages, but there can be some disadvantages if your employees generally are not up to, if they're not up to a standard. So there's stress if the employee doesn't want to take on that role. If they feel like it's too big a step up for them, that they're being given a lot of responsibility, they don't have the experience, so it could lead to some stress for an employee. Sometimes, especially if there's a lack of experience, there could be very poor decisions that are made. In a sports team, if you have somebody who's being brought in to take over the strength and conditioning of a team, and they're not that, they don't have much experience, and they end up working the players, running them into the ground, and I suppose there's too much fatigue built up in the team before they ever get around to playing their games. That would be a poor decision being made on the strength and conditioning coach. If you have a company and you have a employee that decides to take up some task on their own, they've no real experience in how to do it, and then they spend too much money on the research, they spend too much time, and they've made poor decisions, well, the business can ultimately suffer. So generally this kind of comes from the stress of, and poor decision making comes from generally the employees not having as much experience for the job you're giving them. And they may resent management if they feel that delegated tasks are simply tasks the manager does not want to do. If you're always delegating somebody to be doing the dirty work, then obviously it's not going to be too much fun for the employee to be cleaning the toilets or something. You have to start somewhere. So benefits of leadership. So achieving organizational goals, management time, these are just basically your benefits of being a leader. Achieving your goals, your management time, increased employee motivation, supporting change in staff recruitment and retention. It's kind of something I'll expand on further later down the line when we're doing a question on something similar. But what are the benefits of having that responsibility really? You're quite motivated. You have time to do things for yourself. You're achieving your goals. You might be helping the business in a certain way, and you're working with staff. I'll get into that in more detail in time to come. The main thing I wanted to focus on was delegating. So again, I would say the theory for this is quite simple, along with the 3 different types of leadership styles. I've given a question for homework, and that question has a little bit of detail on what I expect you to include in your answer. So please read up on that. For your notes copy, the last day I didn't get you to take down everything because I just felt like there was a lot of notes. So I think I got you to take as far down as democratic. So I'm assuming slide 10 is where you got to take down last. Now there isn't a whole lot of slides here, but the material itself is quite important because it's a regular question. So for not for your homework questions up in Google Classroom, but the actual slides that I want you to take down, 11, 12, 13, pretty much, sorry, 11 to 18. So there's a good few slides there, but to be honest, the 3 different leadership styles and questions on delegating are quite important. So that material is something that I definitely kind of would want you to have. You know, and that will be focusing on, and there'll be questions based around. So again, obviously at this stage you've watched the video, taking down slides 11 to 18 into your notes copy, and there's a question up on Google Classroom as well. Thanks for listening.